So hello, everyone. Welcome to the 7 Deadly Shadows Masterclass with me. And today we are going over the disconnection shadow. And the reason why I chose this as the first shadow that we're going to be going over is because this is actually the top of the umbrella. So when you're looking at all of the other shadows that we're going to be going over, you could technically just come back to the disconnection shadow again and again and again and again. And the thing about this is it's like the biggest paintbrush that we have when we're talking about shadow, because disconnection is the number one reason. Like if you were to look at every human problem, every type of shadow that exists, it would fall under the category of disconnection. So we're starting with this because I'm going to be breaking down like the shadow energetics. I'm going to be explaining some foundational pieces that will be really helpful for you to understand as we move throughout this masterclass together. So I need to give a few disclaimers for this that you just need to know. So the first thing is that don't listen to this in front of kids, because it's going to be pretty much exclusively dark subject matter about a whole bunch of controversial topics, social issues, things like that. And so this just don't play this around kids. Just put in some headphones, shield that protect their innocence, please. That will make this a lot better for everyone. The second thing is I am not walking on eggshells. I am not coddling. This is not a trauma healing class. Okay, so I just want to make that clear now. If any of this sets you off, you need to go regulate yourself, because this teaching doesn't work if I censor myself, if I buffer the messages that want to come through. I must be able to speak candidly. So you've been warned. There's not going to be any fluff in this. My delivery has to be just absolute and concrete. The third thing that you need to know, you will probably project hatred onto me at some point, because I'm going to be speaking from the perspective of shadow itself. So there's a really good chance that you're going to want to, that you're going to see scary things from me when I'm in that mode. So the best way to go about this, and it's totally cool if you do that. I understand you may want to throw rotten tomatoes at me. It's going to be okay. But understand that I'm just explaining the energetics. I am not out to get you. I am not coming after you. Okay, so there's no witch hunt vibes necessary, although we will cover that. So just understand that the probability of that is very, very high. And my recommendation is that you leave morality and opinions outside. Put it outside. Leave it in a box while you're listening to this class. That's going to be really important, because when people talk about shadow, the thing that trips people up is they want to incorporate morality. Morality isn't relevant in this conversation because I'm talking about energetics. So it's not about the judgments that particular humans have come to about what is right and wrong. It's not about your individual life experience. This is about the mechanical pieces of shadow. So if you're constantly bringing morality and opinion into the conversation, it is going to be hell on earth for you. And it's just, you're not going to have a good time. You're constantly going to want to strangle me through the screen, because we're talking about nothing but dark subject matter. So this is not a place for opinion. And I will do my best to let you know the difference between mechanics. And if I do happen to insert my own opinion, I'll let you know, like, yeah, this is 100% a judgment on my part, to make the distinction really, really clear. Okay? Let me see if there's any other disclaimers before I forget anything. Okay. the other piece that's really important for you to understand about this. Humor transforms. Seriousness weighs down. So you will notice that if you incorporate humor, it's going to carry you into a lighter and lighter and lighter place where shadow can actually transform. If you start bringing seriousness, you are going to feel in your body rotten. You're going to feel really, really bad if you're constantly shifting into seriousness or wanting me to take things super seriously. And that is just not helpful because it will actually carry you farther into it and you're going to be embodying it more. I have to incorporate as much levity as possible in order to have a nice mix, a nice balance around these conversations. So once again, you might think I'm insensitive. You might think that I'm horrible for incorporating humor, but we've gotta. And it reminds me, it's so funny how much wisdom is in Harry Potter. Almost like there's naive wisdom in those books. It's the craziest thing. But in the third book or the third movie, there's this box and this thing called a Bogart that will just transform into your worst fear, like the worst possible thing that you could ever see. And the way that it shifts is when you make fun of it. That is a real thing. Shadow will transform when you poke fun, when you make jokes. This is why the clown archetype is so important. And I talk about it all the time. Yes, okay, perfect example. Is this why in AA meetings everyone is using a ton of humor and making fun of their dark past? Yeah, it adds levity. Right? So if you had to choose between re-traumatizing yourself and transforming it, because if you repeat stories, often you will re-traumatize yourself. This is why talk therapy can be a little bit sketchy if there's no somatic tools thrown into it. If you're not integrating it fully with somatic tools, then you're just going to re-traumatize yourself all the time. So the other option is jokes. It can add that levity and make it way more palatable. When I was young, my mother was hitting me and I made a joke and she completely transformed. I've been in dangerous situations where humor got me out. You've got to be able to read the situation like that. And of course, this is the type of stuff that we're going to be talking about, right? Like I fully anticipate getting more comments like this that are like dark things where that humorous thread, you are more than welcome. If you've got a dark joke, crack it. If you've got a dark joke in this class, nothing is off limits. Go hard in this class. So this is the point. This is an important perspective to hold. And you will see it more and more and more, that the people who are more serious are often more miserable. And the people who can play and laugh and joke and transform things, they're having more fun. They're more inviting. They're more playful. It's like it makes them more magnetic. This is why. Okay. Anything else? Okay. We are going to get into the origin of shadow, we could say. I'm really excited to talk to you about this. So the interesting thing in all of this is a lot of the time people think that because dark things exist, because shadow exists, it is at odds with creating your own reality. Simply put, people think because terrorist attacks, mass shootings, because pedophiles exist, creating your own reality is completely out of the question. That's not correct. That's not energetically accurate. They're not at odds with each other. They expand together. So when you think about the expansion of the universe, the best visual, I can't even describe it with language, but I can give you a visual representation of it. It's kind of like this, right? Things coming out, things expanding. And it's funny how this kind of looks like an infinity sign. Like it's that shape where things are just endlessly expanding and coming out. And when you look at the ends, the growth, when we're talking about shadow and light, good and evil, both are expanding at the exact same time and at the same rate. This is key. This is also why people think the world is getting worse, because shadow and light expand at the same rate. Problems and solutions expand at the same rate. All of this is created at the same rate. So let's back up for a little bit. Let's talk pre-Earth. So universal expansion is still happening. That's still a thing that exists, right? What people call stardust. So let's just imagine that it's all stardust, just this ever-expanding stardust. And this, okay, let me make a language distinction so we can talk about this clearly. This is energy, energetic expansion, energy expansion, okay? Idea, when I'm saying idea, at least in this conversation that we're having, I'm talking about energy. So Earth is an idea. Human is an idea. Goldfish is an idea. Shoes are an idea. Couch is an idea. Stars are an idea. When I'm talking about thought or a thought form, I'm talking about something that has landed in a human brain and has been interpreted by a human brain. Idea is energy. Thought must come in contact with a human brain. Iffy on animals. It's not quite the same thing. So for this conversation, I'm saying a human brain. That's what a thought form is. So as the expansion of the universe is happening, the evolution of the universe is happening, different ideas are what created everything. Isn't that crazy to think about? The idea is what created it. The idea is what created Earth. The idea is what created trees. The idea is what created what we know as the natural world. Human was an idea. And the reason being is that with every idea, it became a point where more universal expansion could exist. So in a tree, universal expansion is happening within a tree or within a rock. The natural world is expanding in the same way that we're expanding, but it's a little bit different because we have different tools and mechanics in our physical bodies that enable us to have even greater expansion. So our interpretations, our brains and senses are a really important part of universal expansion. So when we're looking at that infinity sign, that like ever expanding stardust, you're sitting in the center of it. Everything is sitting in the center of it. And just like the light that you have within you is expanding, so is the shadow at the same time. When you see something really scary, there's also something really light. There's also a solution that exists way over here. They're expanding all at the same time. So the visual that I'm giving you for this is going to be a continuum. So there is a continuum of shadow and light, or a continuum of good and evil. Every thought form that has ever existed, every idea, then thought form, then manifestation that has ever existed is like a stamp on the continuum. So when we were cavemen, right, when we were primitive creatures exclusively, our range was actually pretty small because there were very few things that could happen. So our range of shadow wasn't that deep. It was like, yeah, rape and pillage was a thing. Forest fires were a thing. Natural disasters, predators were a thing. Persecution, hating another tribe, right? Like the rape and pillage thing, wanting to come after another tribe for all their resources. That's a pretty shallow range. And then you have like on the other side being blissed out in a meadow, campfires, dancing, singing, like you have other things that exist, but the range is pretty shallow. When you're looking at what has happened on Earth today, holy crap, it is wildly different. Because the thing is, rape and pillage didn't disappear. It's still a thought form. We have that stamp in the continuum of our humanity. It will never go away. You will always be able to tap into rape and pillage energy. It's a frequency that will always exist. Bonding, community, singing and dancing around a fire will always exist. And the more expansion has happened, more it expands on both ends. So you see this with technology. There's the invention of the internet. The dark web is right behind it. Who would have thought you would not have been able to conceive of the idea 50 years ago that at some point, if I got in a time machine and went back 50 years and I told you there's going to come a time where you can look something up on this device and you can order bloody hair and teeth from a murdered person, you can get that shipped to you in the mail. That is not conceivable 50 years ago because the expansion could not match that level of shadow. It's not that the world is getting worse. It is that there is so much expansion that we have such a verbose and expansive history that we have all of these stamps in our passport of shadow. This is why it never goes away. So anything that has ever existed will always exist. I'm sure you've heard, energy cannot be created nor destroyed. This is what we're talking about. Shadow and light can't be destroyed. So let me go back. I remember there's a piece that I forgot to touch on. In this expansion that we're all a part of, shadow came to be because it was an idea. And the idea behind shadow was, it didn't really go like this because it wasn't interpreted by human. But you can imagine it was, oh, I know. You know what would make our creations go even faster? Is if we had shadow. And adding shadow into the creative mix of this experience was jet fuel. So now shadow and light are the very things that allow us to create at a rapid pace. We can only create the way we do because of shadow. If there was no passport stamp of extreme poverty, the passport stamp of extreme wealth couldn't exist. This is why they both grow. They're both expanding. So it's interesting, the metric that people use a lot of the time, just people who are talk about, you can only measure society by the weakest person. That is insane. That's my opinion. That's insane because that's how it's literally designed. So if you're constantly saying, I'm going to measure how good or bad Earth is by how deep we go into shadow, you're always going to see the world is getting worse and worse and worse because it's not going to stop. And there are terrible things that will be created that you cannot conceive of yet because you haven't expanded to that point. It's like the shadow is infinite. It's not going anywhere. So people are looking for like this utopia that can't happen. Because if we had a utopia, there would be no point in creating. Being human would be completely irrelevant if utopia existed. If you really think about it. Because the shadow is what allows us to create in the way that we do. It is the most important element of this whole thing that we're doing in human bodies. And when you look at it this way as it's important, it matters, you want it. What if you played with that idea? You want it. Shadow is important for you. It's important for humanity. It's essential. So this is essentially how shadow came to be. I've heard different iterations of the story, but this one came to me several days ago, this explanation of there being this ever-expanding continuum, and shadow is nothing more than an idea. So ideas are energy, then ideas turn into thoughts, then thoughts turn into manifestations. And depending on what's going on with you and where you're dwelling energetically, that is going to determine what type of energy you are connected to, what type of thought forms you receive, and what type of manifestations you create. And that's what we're all doing here. Let me check my notes. Okay, let's shift into disconnection. I'm going to take a sip really quick. So disconnection, when I'm talking about disconnection, it is disconnection from God, disconnection from source, disconnection from the universe, whatever you like to call it, that divine energy that you can plug into. Disconnection just means you're getting really, really, really far from it. So if you're what I'm calling connected, and let me also just, for technicality's sake, I played with a few different types of word for this. So I also played with unconsciousness, but that doesn't quite work because you're still using consciousness in many cases. There was a lot of words that I played with. Disconnection was the best one I could come up with to describe this overarching shadow that we have going on. So even though you technically cannot be disconnected from God, you can't, it can never be severed, because remember, everyone is at the center of this point where universal expansion is happening. So you, being a microcosm of the universe in physical form, can't be cut off, because everything that you do, good, bad, and ugly, is a part of the creative process. It's a part of consciousness itself expanding. Disconnection is when you get really far away from your soul, God, universe, divine source, when you get far away from that. So as soon as you slip out of it, you'll feel bad. You'll feel rotten. It's just going to not feel good in any capacity. The other characteristic of this, and this is going to be really important for future calls that we have on this. Disconnection, the key characteristic of disconnection is that it pulls you out of your power and it pulls you out of your creatorship. These are illusions. That's not ultimately true. It's not true that you have no power and you're not a creator. It's an illusion. When you're in a shadow state, when you're in a shadow frequency, you buy in that that's the truth. And that you're not creating, that you don't have any power, you don't have any sway. There's something about it that comes up as a thought form. Let me say this a little bit more clearly. Disconnection causes you to plug into ideas, so energetic frequencies that bring you thought forms that present the illusion that you have no power and you are not a creator. That's the most concise way I can say it. So you will notice that over the next 6 calls that we have, the running theme is that different shadows that we talk about are doing different things in terms of your belief around your own creatorship. That's really what it attacks. So when you're plugged into shadow, creatorship completely goes out of your mind. Like that's not even something that you can really conjure with as much ease. If that makes sense. It's kind of like this potion that just makes you forget that you're creating all of this. Now, if you're able to get your consciousness to a point where you can be in shadow and understand you're creating at the same time, now that's a whole other level of power. I even shared this on Instagram the other day. I said, when I'm complaining now, I say I'm annoyed at what I'm creating, and I cheer on higher frequencies no matter how marginal they are. So I would rather be annoyed than depressed. And that's a win. Or I would rather be angry. I would rather be angry and frustrated than wanting to seek revenge on someone. Right? So there's all these different ranges that we can play in. But when it comes to holding consciousness and power and being in shadow, that's actually the sweet spot. When you can have that radical responsibility, maintain your creatorship, and witness shadow. Okay. So this next piece, this will be nice and juicy for everyone. Let me tell you the recipe for a mass shooting, because it's a very clear recipe. Terrorist attacks are a bit more broad, so I'm not going to, there's like so many dimensions to that. This is much more narrow and easy for me to describe. So this is the recipe for a mass shooting. You have a human born into a disconnected environment. Let me circle back to this in a moment. Okay, so hold that. Human born in disconnected environment. They then become available for ideas, energy, thought forms that match that level of disconnection, which can vary in severity. Then you have humans that are, let me say it differently. You have souls that are available to depart Earth. You put all of those 3 things together, you have a mass shooting. That's it. When I say disconnected, so a human being in a disconnected environment, and this actually explains a lot of trauma altogether, is that it does not, hold on one second. It does not mean that you have a drug addict father who's beating you every day. People think about that a little bit too stereotypically when we're talking about Why do people do bad things? Or why are they engaging in these horrible behaviors, what we judge as being horrible? And disconnection is a really good way to lump everything together, because disconnection could be an avoidant, dismissive mother, a parent who withholds love. It could be a father who doesn't really want anything to do with you. That's not necessarily an extreme environment to be born into. But if there's enough disconnection for long enough, it starts to fester. And that's when you get some really wicked shadow going on. So the disconnection is key. This is why you're not going to be able to say, oh, this type of home with these types of behaviors going on. There's some of that, but it's not going to be consistent. Because then you have me, who was born into degrees of shadow that I can't actually believe I made it out of, yet I'm here. So it's not black and white. It's not super, super, super clear what's going on. There's a lot of variability to it. But I think the easiest way for us to look at this is disconnection. The question is not, were you beat every day? The question is, was your home really disconnected? That's a better question. Because then you can start looking at the energetic subtleties of what is going on within the household. Then you have an explanation that actually makes sense. And then you can say, that's disconnection. You'll also notice when people talk about their childhood and are often very dismissive of it, they'll say, it was bad, but it wasn't that bad. There was probably a lot of disconnection. You see this a lot with addicts. I see it very, very often with addicts. They're like, I had a 2-parent household. Nothing crazy was going on. My dad hit me, but it didn't hospitalize me, or little things like that. Or my mom was kind of out of it. All of that is pointing to disconnection. That's the underlying theme in all of this. So the other thing that I really want to bring to the table here is the understanding of death. Okay, let me read this comment and then we're going to talk about death. Oh my God, yes, my dad, severe alcoholic drug addict with 2 on the surface amazing parents. This makes me understand a bit more. Yes. So when people are minimizing their experiences, or when on the surface it really doesn't look that bad, look at, is there a disconnection factor in there? The other thing that I notice is that there's a lot of people who don't necessarily get born into it. So I was born into shadow. I came out of the womb. I was like, let's do some work. Feed me some shadow, and I'm going to catapult myself into this other side of the spectrum. That's what happened for me, and I know that that's true for a lot of people. You see it with poverty a lot. People who get a taste of poverty never want it again. If they can find a way out of poverty, they're going to want to skyrocket into wealth a lot of the time. This isn't always true. Some people live a little bit more modestly, but it is a pattern that I see pretty frequently. Like, fuck poverty, I will never do it again. I have that wound for sure. But there are other people who do get born into really loving, amazing families. Then they get hit with shadow later. Then it's, oh, but so-and-so died. I had a whole bunch of grief, or I lost a whole bunch of people back to back to back, or I got into an abusive relationship. I had this, that, and the other thing happened. There's almost this kickback of shadow that happens later in life. You'll notice it with people. If you listen to their stories, if they didn't have it early on, there will often be some kickback later in life. or like in early adulthood, you'll see it all the time. Now that I've told you, you'll notice. So, death. Most people understand death as, a lot of the time, like a victimization process. Like if someone comes up to you and shoots you, there was a victim and there was a perpetrator. That's usually how we look at it. And a lot of the time, this is because of media, television, and a lot of the stuff that they show you on the news. This isn't the whole story. It's not the whole story. Death is a soul choice. This is where, like, if you're not on board, if you don't agree with this class is going to be so hard. And it's totally okay if you're like, not into it. No judgment on my part. I know that it's just not common for people to be speaking about death in this way. My understanding of energetics and death, because people don't leave, they don't go anywhere, it transforms, right? Energy cannot be created nor destroyed. The energy of a human soul or any soul, animal soul, a soul of the natural world cannot be destroyed ever. Like Atlantis. Think about Atlantis. Whether or not you think it exists is irrelevant. The energy of it exists. This is exactly what death is. It just transforms. And so the characteristic that determines whether or not someone dies is whether or not the soul is ready. Not if they were victimized by another person. Because then the premise of we are creating our own reality doesn't work. And if you're here, you probably know you're a creator because you've probably been doing it. There's something about that holds resonance if you follow my work at all, right? So you can't have both at the same time. You can't say you're creating except this death thing. This death thing is the one thing where I stop creating. It doesn't work like that. We experience death in conjunction with a lot of shadow experiences because it makes sense for the continuity of the human experience. So there are many reasons why people choose to depart the way that they do, but the biggest one is continuity. If you look at how people die, it's almost like it's making sense for the human aspect of us that tells stories. So humans decide, the soul decides when it's ready to depart and how it chooses to depart. Is it abrupt? Are they here for a while? Are they here for a split second? Are they here for 120 years? Are they blowing everyone's minds with how long they have a human body, right? There's all sorts of different experiences. And this is also why you won't hear this on the news, okay? That's because this isn't going to make a headline. But if you've spent any time with violent criminals, I've heard this quite a lot from violent criminals that they have witnessed countless times watching someone take a pistol, point it at someone, completely unload a clip, and miss every shot within feet of another person. And it happens all the time, like all the time. But we're not really talking about, oh yeah, there was a shootout between some criminals, right? That's not juicy enough to make a news headline, right? The news organizations want death. They're like, we want a lot of death. We want a lot of tragedy. We want to talk about all of that stuff. And so if you just look at people who are available for violence, but unavailable for death, that's a different type of energetic availability. So energetic availability is key. You can be available for making it through without a scratch on you. You can be available for injury. You can be available for full-blown death. You can be available for a lot of different things. But it is not a matter of whether or not you're victimized. Because then, like I said, the creatorship thing, you can't have both. Either people are victims or people are creators, and you only get to choose one in order for any of this to make any sense and in order for any of this to work. So again, these near-death experiences or someone pointing a gun, bang, 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 missing every shot, there might be a little bit of physics in the mix, right? That might be true. Like, yeah, sure, shorter barrel of the gun, you move it a millimeter over the trajectory of the bullet. Yeah. I get it. I get the physics of it. But the fact that this is common, like within feet of standing across from each other, and they're living. They're like living. This is like a lifestyle that criminals have. Again, if you're not really exposing yourself to the shadow side of that, you're probably not going to get exposure to it. But if you listen to stories, they'll tell you that the violence without death, way more common. So then that's a different style, right? You have people who are disconnected, it's festered. Then they get into altercations where there's more availability for violence. There's definitely availability for injury, but not always death. And then there are different types of situations where it's, you see this in gang initiations a lot of the time. They'll say, you have to kill someone. We're going to watch you kill someone. So then someone has to be an energetic match to be murdered. They have to be available and they have to be ready. The soul has to decide, like, yeah, let's just go. So the death thing, the reason why I'm even bringing it up is because I want to like make that clear right now so that you're not constantly like, but what about death? But what about death? But what about death? What about murder? Let's just get all of that out of the way right now. Okay, let me read this comment. Oh yeah, my dad is type 1 diabetic, heart attack, massive stroke, etc., etc. That's not even half of it. He's died like 7 times, but his soul refuses to leave his body. He keeps coming back to life. Also, I died in 2014 and was on my way out and changed my mind because I came back after an OD because I wasn't done. Yes. You see it all the time. My dad has overdosed countless times. I'm like, how are you still getting revived? He had like 5 overdoses in a month and a half. It was something ridiculous like that. I'm like, are you serious? What are you doing? Please go. Okay. How do you accept the shadow side instead of fearing it and not make yourself available for it in the process? The creatorship piece is where you get into it. It's like scary things can exist without you being available for them. And how you know that you've neutralized it is by how it feels in your body. So how I know I've overcome isn't the right word exactly, but how I know I've shifted out of different anxieties that I used to have is because my body doesn't get flooded with fear. And then I say, there's neutrality here. And if you can think about it with neutrality without being afraid of it, that's how you know. So it's like, yes, it exists. Like, take something really extreme, like being, meeting someone in a grocery store, being kidnapped, locked in a basement, forcibly injected with heroin, like being trafficked, like all of these different things. You probably don't experience a whole bunch of terror about that because it's like too extreme. It's too dramatic. And isn't that interesting where typically the more drama, like the more extreme, the less likely you feel it is. And so there's less fear. I'm so sorry that I am psychic. So the comment is that is actually exactly the fear. Oh my God. I'm so sorry. Well, okay, we're here. We're here. This is good. Okay, let's do this. Let's play with it a little bit more. Why is that scary? Tell me, like, what is the feeling that's scary? What about it is scary? I know it seems like a stupid question, but it'll illuminate a lot. Powerlessness and trapped. Disconnection outside of creatorship. So then it's, I'm afraid of being powerless, but that's never true. That's never true when you're working with energetics. The thing that is on my mind the most that does make me afraid is health issues. Like health stuff. I don't know it's there, but it's going on. And what if it, puts me into a situation where I'm like medically kidnapped by a doctor and forced into all of these different treatments? Okay. So like, I totally get the drama of it. But when I ask myself, do I want to create that? No. And the other piece is I've had that fear for a long, long, long time. And it's not something I've created. I'm in great health. Like it's a non-issue, but I have to reconnect. When you're in connection with God, it's like, it's indescribable how powerful you feel. This is why the remedy is connection. Sometimes I'll be afraid of a home invasion because I have this like big, nice house and I'm like by myself. I don't even have a dog, right? And so sometimes I'll be afraid of home invasion. And then I ask myself, well, do I want to create home invasion? No. I know I can choose what I want. Like there's this big long menu and I get to choose, I get to decide. And so it's stimulating the feelings that are medicinal for you. And then sometimes I'll put, I love playing with different like little magical and visual things. So sometimes I will have Kuan Yin. It's the guide that I use to protect my house, actually. And she has a lot of dragon energy. And I just have her take her dragon all the way around the perimeter of the house. Here's another one that I'll give you. This is another thing that I love, is I imagine that I'm in this enchanted forest. And the enchanted forest that I'm surrounded by actually makes me invisible to predators. There's like this enchantment on the land that I'm in. And then it makes it so that everyone who has positive will, let's call it, is magnetically drawn in, but people who are predators literally get lost in the forest. So usually I use childlike imagination things to help with that. Because then for whatever reason, that actually connects me to my power more. The other way is to finish the end of the story. You'll notice this happens a lot for people. I've talked to so many clients about this. I'll say, okay, what are you afraid of? And then they'll tell me what they're afraid of. And it'll be like at the climax of the story. And I'm like, okay, but finish the story. Like, then what? And if you finish the story, because there's a resolution in a normal storyline, you have it leads up to the climax and then there's resolution. If you get to the resolution part, it will diffuse everything. So in the situation where I'm like, oh, you're trapped in a basement, someone kidnaps you, blah, blah, blah. Okay, then you die. And then you say, you know what, I want to try again. So you come back down to earth. Like, sometimes that will just diffuse it. Like, okay, you could also say, if that were ever even going to happen, this is another thing that I tell myself. I would be like, nah, I would just rather die. I'd rather die. I'm not available for that. I'm more available for death than I am for that. So because I have other things that I want to create, and there's other things that I want to do, and I like being in this human body, and I like this life that I'm living, that I just want more of that. And that's what I'm choosing. That's what I'm saying yes to. And so, nah, I would just die before that ever happened. Like, I would die before medical kidnapping occurred, for sure. So I don't know if that brings you peace, but sometimes it like just stamps out all of the emotional charge. And it's like, oh, I've already decided my creations matter. My creations are important. So I have permission to be on earth. So you can let me know if that scared you more, helped you, whatever that may have done. Okay, let me check my notes again. Okay, that helped. Good. I think that is about it. Is there anything else that I want to say about disconnection? The only thing that I'd like to wrap up here, and we kind of already got into it with this Q&A, right? These little questions, is that all things will point you back to God. Again and again and again and again. It'll point you back to this idea of connection. And when you get plugged in, when you start getting juiced up, you'll feel this invincibility. You'll feel your power. You'll feel the certainty of your desires unfolding and things going well for you. And I promise you that the depths of the shadow are not necessary for you to experience in real time, right? I'm sure many of you have had lots of fears that have not come to life. Because generally, fears are much slower. Shadow is much slower than light. So that's another way to think about it. And anytime you have a problem, anytime you're trapped in one of these shadows or you feel trapped in a shadow, go back to connection. Go back to how can I plug in? Go back to the perspective of my soul, and that will help. Your soul, okay, here's another thing. Your soul is never going to tell you, God is never going to tell you, oh yeah, that's definitely going to happen. Yeah, you're going to get trapped in a basement. That's never going to, no, your soul is not going to tell you that. What will tell you that is if you are dwelling in a frequency that makes you available for ideas, that makes you available for thought forms, that stimulate that thought, and then you're presented with the scary thing. But it doesn't mean that it's legit. It's just a passport stamp where humanity has gone. And so you're just tangled up in that passport stamp. That's the way that you can look at this continuum, right? When I'm looking at medical kidnapping, it's just a passport stamp. I don't have to go there. Kidnapping of other varieties, you don't have to go there. And it's true for everything. Every shadow element that has ever existed will continue to exist. And this is exactly why we can entertain these frequencies and be available for the thought forms. To give you some reassurance as well, you would have to be really, really, really unconscious to be doing this work and be immersed in my world and also manifest that. Because your desires are always going to be dominant. Good things will always be dominant because that's when you're plugging into the frequency of like that pure God force energy. God is technically interacting with all of this in different degrees and in different, different amounts, different quantities. So it's, like I said, nobody is ever severed or disconnected. It's just that when you are deep, deep, deep in shadow, how God shows up is going to be a lot different than if you're blissed out and in your full power and in your full abundance, creatorship, living, having the time of your life. The way it shows up is going to be different. It's not gone, it's just different. And also you can ask yourself, am I afraid of this because I really enjoy life? What I've noticed is one of the reasons why that I have had health anxiety is because I'm afraid of not being able to enjoy my life the way that I'm enjoying it. And that can often be one of the big reasons, like, oh shit, I'm not going to be enjoying my life if I'm trapped in a basement, right? Like I'm not going to be having a good time. And so then you can say, I like having a good time, so on and so forth. These are the things that I like. These are the things I prefer. This is where I want to orient myself. And you can start digesting more of that. I think that is it for disconnection today. I don't know which shadow I'm going to be talking about next. It will be a mystery. I have just been receiving more and more things over the past several weeks. So we will see what comes through next, but I hope you've enjoyed this call. Are there any other questions? Let's just wrap up. If you have any other questions about what I've talked about for now, so happy that you're doing better. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, I will give you this. I'll give you this too. So yesterday, if you follow me on Instagram, I had 103-degree fever for like most of the day. I woke up with a fever that was a little bit milder. And I remember telling myself, I'm ready to meet this and shift it. And the guide that I chose to come sit with me was actually Jesus. The reason being is that way back when he was doing his exorcist thing, he dealt with a lot of fever demons, is what they would call them. And so he is like an expert in sickness. And so he is my favorite one to work with anytime I'm not feeling well, because it's kind of like your illness can't even exist around Jesus because he won't acknowledge that frequency within you. So that's a little tidbit for you. The other thing that I want to mention before we wrap up is I have two brand new things that I'm going to be launching during this masterclass. I'm very excited. I have a mini mastermind coming up, and I also have the sequel to Dom. And of course, it's going to be sub. So I'm very excited. I'm going to be sharing more about that. Jesus say relax. That is right. He does say relax. And so stay tuned. More to come. I'm going to go ahead and give my voice a break, chill out, get ready for tomorrow. And I will see you all next time. Have a good one, everybody. Bye.